This is Judy from Patterns for Pirates, and today I'm going to sew up a fierce bra with you. I'm going to be doing a youth size, so it will be fully lined, but I won't be doing the inner lining or the removable cups option that the adult has. I have my pieces here. I have one front and two mirror image backs. And then I have the same in my main fabric. My unicorn is going to be my lining, and then the pink is going to be my main fabric. I have waistband elastic. And I have my marked straps. So if you can see, I have marked my two markings for my outer strap, and then I also marked which one was the back. And so I have two mirror image of these as well. When you mark your straps, you need them two mirror image. So I have the back right here and the back right here, giving me two mirror image. I also have my marked inner strap. I marked my marks, and then I also marked the center. So it's a fold line on your piece, and I just marked that fold center so that I could align it with the center of my piece as well. All right, to get started, you're going to grab your main fabric. This one's tricky to tell the right side from the wrong side. And your main backs. You're going to put them right side together. I do always assume if I have that hard of a time distinguishing the front and the back, nobody else will be able to notice either, right? And I'm going to pin it at the side seams. So again, I have my main front piece and my main lining piece, and I have them pinned at each side seam. I'm going to repeat that with my lining fabric. So just my front and my two backs, aligning them at the side seam and pinning them. You'll be able to tell a little bit better with this lining. Then they are right sides together. It's very curly. Right sides together, and we're gonna stitch along these side seams. The fabric's curling up on me. Sewing at a 3/8 seam allowance, which means I'm still trimming some off. I am trimming off an 1/8 of an inch, and then my serged seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so now I just have one long strip, a back, the front and the back all connected. I'm going to repeat that with my main fabric. My main fabric is just an athletic knit, and my lining is a cotton spandex. I really love the athletic knit for a sports bra feel and look, and I love the cotton spandex for like a lounge set, pajama set. Okay, now I'm going to place my lining and my main fabric together with wrong sides together. I'm also going to nest my seams right here. So on my lining fabric, I'm either going to press them to the front or the back on both sides. So I'm going to press it to the front. And of course, pressing with an iron is much better. And on my main fabric, I'm going to press those to the back. And that way, my seam allowances are not doubly thick. The stitch line will align, and then one seam allowance will go to the front, one seam allowance will go to the back, and it just helps make it not quite as bulky there, which is important when you're stitching on top of it, because your machine prefers not super bulky or thick. So it's easier when you nest those seams. Okay, so I have my two pieces wrong side together, and I am going to grab my inner neckline and crisscross straps piece. I have it marked, my 3 markings, and I am going to attach or pin, the center at my center notch. You're just going to align your raw edge right to, which I cut a center notch, if you can see. I always cut just a little tiny notch in my center folds because I find it easier than finding the center later on, marking with a pin. I'm actually going to trim that off. So I'm aligning the edge right up into that fold. There is a right and wrong side to your fold over elastic. It will naturally fold. And there's also, most fold over elastics are very so slightly longer. Not sure I can focus. Very slightly longer on one half than the other, and you want that on the back, the longer piece on the back. And that's just to give that tiny bit of extra assurance that you're catching both sides. Okay, so I have my other marked part, and I'm going to align that at the top edge of my neckline. And again, I'm aligning my edge all the way up into that fold line and pinning. And I'm going to repeat on the opposite side. There's my mark. I'm going to align it at the top, and the edge of my fabric is going to align to that fold piece right there. And as you can see, my fold over elastic is smaller than my piece, and we're going to stretch that fold over elastic as we stitch. I love to baste right here. It makes attaching much easier if you take the time to run a quick basting stitch right here. Your next step is going to be much smoother and easier and quicker for you. I find it much worth the time that a basting stitch takes to run on and pull off. Oh, and it looks like my pin came out on that center mark. But I'm going to stretch my fold over elastic just enough to meet my fabric. I'm going to align both the lining and the main fabric right to that fold line. And go nice and slowly, since we're stretching and aligning both fabrics. I want to make sure and get it nice and precise. You shouldn't need to stretch that much. It's about at 90% where the marking is, so it shouldn't be stretched too much. but every fold over elastic is different. If you find that your fold over elastic is really tight with a really strong recovery, you might not need to stretch quite as much as the 90%. If you have a fold over elastic that is the opposite, that is very, very thin and very, very stretchy, you might need to stretch it slightly more. This is just a guide. Okay, so as you can see, I basted it on, and now we're just going to fold over and pin. Again, the fold over elastic naturally folds over at that fold line. Make sure it's right at the top. There we go. One more pin. And again, we will have to stretch when we're attaching it this time as well. Okay, I ran over to my cover stitch machine. You can also do this with your favorite high stitch stretch stitch on your machine. My favorite happens to be the triple step zigzag, but whatever your favorite is. And we're going to start at the very top, and we're just going to fold it along that natural fold and top stitch it closed. And this is going to be our strap. I prefer a wider set cover stitch or double needle, but whatever your preference is. You have to leave that pin in until the last second. Make sure everything's aligned in there perfectly. Again, we're going to be stretching this fold over elastic as we attach. And then the rest of the strap is the same. Just fold it over, top stitch, all the way till the end. So there it is on the right side, there it is on the wrong side. I have my basting stitch in, and so I like to just stretch it. And you can hear some of those straight stitches pop, and it should be nice and easy to pull out. Here we go. There we go. It was a black thread, so it was super easy for me to make sure I saw it all. And as you can see, my stitch on the front side, excuse me, is all the way on the very bottom, but then the back has some on the bottom, and that's because it's a little bit longer on the back side than the front side. Mine has a slight gather right now, but when it's on the body, it should stretch, and it might just need a little press as well. But all fold over elastics are different, so if you're finding after you baste yours on that it's gathering a little bit too much for you, you can always stretch it slightly less than the 90%. Alright, this part can be a little bit tricky, so I have you pointed down so you could really see the pieces a little bit better, hopefully. We have just finished sewing on our neckline and top stitching the straps. Now what we're going to do is open up our bodice so that we can see the right sides of the lining and the main fabric. Okay. What we're going to do is crisscross our straps but we want to make sure they don't twist. Okay. I'm gonna grab a pin, and with wrong sides to the lining's right side, the wrong side, I have a cover stitch, so there's my wrong side, to the right side of your lining, you are going to pin your strap at that back corner. So all the way, both edges in the corner along that back angle. So I'm going to lay mine out again and make sure nothing gets twisted. And I'm going to pin this side as well. Wrong side to the right side of my lining fabric. And now I'm going to baste these in place. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we're going to flip it back to where it's right sides together. And so all of our binding is on the inside now. And we are going to pin and stitch these back little angles here. And I'm going to stitch that on my serger. The same 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm going to repeat on this side, again, right sides together. That very back center, angled. Okay, now I'm going to flip it right sides out. And now is a good time to press the seam. When you flip it out, you should have a little bit of room right here, and that is to attach your fold over elastic. So I know we put it at the very top corner, but then when we stitch it, you'll see there's a little bit of room right here. That should be 1/2 inch exactly to line up the rest of your fold elastic. I really like to top stitch this. I find it helps this from pulling out of place and this keeping a nice straight smooth line. So I'm going to go to my cover stitch and do that quickly. Okay, so I top stitched along both of those quickly. Just trimming some of my threads. I never like to trim my thread too short because I never want it to unravel before I finish stitching that seam. So do be cautious of that. Okay, so now we have the inner strap completely done. It's attached on the neckline, it is crisscrossed and sandwiched between our lining and our main fabric on the back. Now what we're going to do is attach our outer straps. So I have my two outer straps here. I'm going to fold them where they have right sides together, and I'm going to stitch with a 3/8 seam allowance, turning this into a circle. Okay, so here I am, I stitched mine. I also like to clip my seam allowance in a certain way, and I'll show you why. We're going to press our seam allowance out, and then it will get folded down. And since it is a curve and being stretched, I often find, these little edges peek out a little bit. So what I like to do is just trim these edges a little bit, just a little triangle. Doesn't need to be big, just a little triangle. And that way, when I press them out and fold them down and it's curving up and being stretched, they won't peek out. So this, I marked the back, so I am going to be sure that I match that. And so my back is going to go on a back piece. I am going to align it at the seam. So the seam on my strap is going to match the seam on my lining and my main fabric. Those are nested to reduce bulk, and I'm going to align it at that middle fold. So the edges of my fabric are right at the fold edge. Now I have my marked line for the very top of the back bodice piece. So I'm going to align my marked edge and this edge. And I am going to align the edge of the fabric to the fold line. And I'm going to put another pin. I'm going to stretch my fold over elastic and put a pin to hold in place. Again, it's not stretched that much, just a little bit. And I'm going to repeat with the front. So here is my marked line. I'm going to line that up with my top edge, and I'm going to align the edge of my fabric to that fold line. There we go. Alright, I'm going to stretch my fold over elastic and put another pin there. Okay, so I'm all pinned up. I'm going to baste this with my sewing machine. It's a lot of layers to keep perfectly aligned, so I really recommend the basting stitch here. It's so quick to do. It will save you from having to take a lot longer as you're stitching it to make sure it's perfect if you just baste it right here. Now, if you're having a hard time basting the lining and the main and the binding together, if that's a little too many layers for you to control at once, you can baste your main and your lining together first and then baste it again onto your binding. Just make sure you remove your basting stitch, your first basting stitch for the main and the lining after you baste it to your strap. or else it will be stuck in there forever. And you'll hear pop, pop, pop. But you won't be able to get the threads out if you don't remove it then. Okay, and at your strap, I'm going to go ahead and try to get a close-up here. Okay, so here's my close-up. Here are my straps. You have exactly 1/2 inch here as long as you took exactly 1/2 inch here. So they should butt together. A few of our testers really liked to overlap them a little bit. You really shouldn't have that much room, but I like to just butt them up together. And there we go. So mine should butt up together, just like that. And as you can see, it didn't gather. It's not pulled too tight that it gathers, but you did have to stretch it a little bit. So now all we're going to do is fold it over. Let me get you away from this light a little bit. Okay, so here we are basted on. All we're going to do now is fold it over right at that fold line, and as however many pins you need to feel comfortable. I usually do one at the seam, and then I come up here to the top, and those again should have just enough to where they kind of butt up and almost they just kind of kiss right there. The camera's having a hard time focusing on it. There we go. So it's right to the corner. Okay, and now I'm going to put a pin on the front corner, and it should be the same where the edge of this fold over elastic just kisses the edge of the neckline. I'll let that focus. There we go. So just kisses the edge. Your two bindings should take up all of that pickup. There should be nothing in between, no space in between. And I'm going to put one more pin right here along the armpit. Make myself feel nice and secure there. That's ready for me. And we are going to finish off this strap exactly like we did the inner strap, starting wherever you want. I usually start somewhere around this seam, but you certainly don't have to. You can start wherever you want on the circle. And you're going to stitch all the way around the whole circle. I am actually going to finish this side, and then I'll meet you at my cover stitch machine. Okay, I'm all pinned up with my outer strap, and I'm gonna go around on my cover stitch. You can use your favorite stretch stitch. Nice and slow over that seam. Again, you want to make sure that your straps come together and kiss to a point. Hold it a little bit too far. Got a little carried away there. Again, when you're coming down here, you want to make sure that your edges kiss right here. to lock my stitches. And now you can remove that basting stitch. I just like to give it a pull. You can hear those that straight stitch just popped. And I did a dark black one, so it's nice and easy to see, nice and easy to pull out. All right, and it should look the same as your neckline and outer strap. And now we're almost done. Okay, I came back to my machine and I did a little bit wider zigzag. I have mine at a 5, but you could do it even wider if you wanted to. And I just did a quick bar tack. I did it in a contrast color to make sure you could really see what I'm talking about. So just right where they kiss, that zigzag kind of grabs them both and makes sure that that little weak spot doesn't get pulled and pulled and pulled. Just gives it a little bit more stability right there. Now what we're going to do is match our back center notches that are on the lining and the main fabric. And I'm just going to baste those together. And actually what I like to do is I like to continue basting all the way around my top with a 3/8 inch allowance. And what that does is it gives me a really nice, neat, simple, quick visual for attaching my waistband. I like to double check that my seams, my side seams are nested perfectly. So I'm going to make sure your fabric's uncurled, your edges are nice and even. If your edges aren't even, maybe you didn't get your top edges nice and even, don't force it. Just trim or take it up in the seam allowance. If you force it to match when it's not matching, you're going to get wrinkles and it's not going to lay nicely. We're not perfect, and that's okay. You've got 3/8 seam allowance that you can kind of get any mistake that maybe it didn't line up perfectly. So like right here, you can see where my lining is just scantly a little bit longer. I didn't force it to line up. I'm just going to put that in my seam allowance and not worry about it. If you force it to line up, then you'll have wrinkles in your fabric because your lining and your main are pulling against each other or have extra against each other. All right, I'm going to grab my waistband piece. I am also going to change out my thread. I wanted that high contrast for the bar tack so you could see it, but I'm putting purple in now to stitch my waistband together. Okay, I have my waistband and I'm going to make sure it's not twisted in any way, so nice and flat. And then I'm going to butt the edges together. I am not going to overlap, I'm just going to butt them together nice and tightly. And then I'm going to pick a zigzag and I'm going to make it as wide as my machine goes. My machine goes to a 7, so that's what I like. I also like to make it a little shorter. usually about a 1 because I like to go down and back. So I don't like it too thick because I like to go travel down and back. I like to start just ever so slightly down on my elastic so I'm not right on the edge, and then I just back up and come back down. Go all the way down. Then I back up all the way, completely going back again. You can make your stitch length much shorter and just go down once, whatever your preference is. Okay, so here's a close-up of that. So you really want as wide as a zigzag as you can to make sure you're enclosing those edges the best you can. Some people like to stick a tiny piece of woven fabric underneath here to stabilize it. I've never had a problem with mine coming undone when I use the widest zigzag setting. But if you're nervous or if you're having trouble getting your machine to feed through, you can add a tiny little scrap of woven fabric to the back to give it some stability. I am quartering my elastic now and just marking with some pins. Your elastic should be pretty close to the finished width of your sports bra, depending on your size. The older girls have to stretch to fit a little bit more than the younger girls. So I have my quartered points. I'm going to quarter my bodice. On the youth and adult, actually, you have a little bit more width on the front than the back. So your quarter points are a little bit towards the front. So all I'm going to do is take the top of my elastic and align it to that basting stitch at my quarter points and throw in some pins. On the youth, you really shouldn't need to stretch at all. And you know what, I have the zigzag in the back. I'm actually going to move that to the side. I don't have a super strong preference there. Sometimes I put it on the very back and sometimes I put it on the side. So whatever you feel looks best with your particular bra and elastic that you're working with. I'm not sure what it is that makes me choose one over the other sometimes. I really like that basting stitch to help give me that visual all the way around. I like to stitch from the right side of my fabric. So I really like my visual to be on the right side of my fabric versus underneath. And I'm going to go to my cover stitch and stitch it on. Okay, so here we are at the cover stitch. I'm going to slide it under there. I like my needle to be pretty close to the top, but it doesn't need to be covering or all the way to the edge or anything. And I am just going to make sure that this top edge of my elastic is right on that basting line. The only other thing I have to do is kind of make sure it's not too curly under there. If it's curled up, it might get stuck like that and be bulky. So you don't want that. Again, on almost all the sizes, you really shouldn't need to stretch. If you are needing to stretch, just barely. It's mostly just keeping that aligned. making sure you're not curled up under there too bad. The women's bodice curves down a little bit in the front for bust room, which can be a little trickier to keep that seam allowance perfect. So the visual of the basting stitch can really help make it really nice and even for you. Lock my stitch here. And trim my threads under here. And we'll be done. I need to go back and trim some of my serger seams and some of my center notches in there. But other than trimming some threads, we have a complete fierce bra. When you first sew it up as well, it might look like your inner straps are slightly longer than your outside straps, and we had a lot of testers go, ooh, they look too long compared to these ones. But the reason is because your shoulder is angled, and so these ones come in right around the neck where it's up a little bit higher, and these ones go more towards the outside of your shoulders where it slopes down a little bit. So when you first sew it up and you see that the inner straps are just ever so slightly taller, don't worry about it. On, it will fit great. That lining's so fun. And then on the inside, you'll take up most of your seam allowance with either your zigzag stitch or your cover stitch. But if you do have some that's off, or like my little center notches, you just can go back with some very small embroidery and trim it off nice and close, as much as you're worried about. My little notch curled on me. So see, I have a little bit, mine's about 1/4 of an inch, I think, wide. So I have about 1/8 of an inch that I can trim off. I really prefer to trim it off, actually. I find it bothers me because knit tends to roll. So then it will roll over where it's already got a seam. I'm gonna trim off these back center notches. Here we go. It looks like we're about all trimmed up now. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed sewing along with me, and I can't wait to see your finished fierce bras.